Hey,
You hear me?
can you hear me?
I don't hear you.
Hang on. How about now? Test, 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 test.
There we go. Yeah, sorry, that was my computer. It was off.
Oh,
All right. First of all, I apologize. I know that we were supposed to do this, I believe, Monday. It just
all good.
the way my job is, sometimes just gets crazy, and then it's so. Thank God we're able to get it done now. Also, congratulations on getting. I got to the finals. I don't know who won between you and Daniel, but like I said, that
Daniel
was a
ended up
phenomenal.
winning.
And that was a great debate. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, okay.
Like I said, I think you guys did put your uh, explained your side and made the case as good as you could, as good as you
Oh,
can. So,
thanks very much.
no problem. I guess let's hop into this. Just to explain what I mean by this resolution, and I guess we on the same page, and we'll take it from
Mhm.
there. Um, when I say if you advocate banning guns, then you must advocate banning alcohol as well. Obviously, what I mean is from a consistent moral and logical standpoint, not from a legal. I'm not saying that you have to. It's just to be consistent logically and morally. Now, also to really say that, you would have to take away anybody's personal cost biases to this. For instance, obviously, if somebody drinks and doesn't own a gun, he could say, no, for me personally, I don't want to ban guns. I don't want to ban alcohol. I want to ban guns. Obviously, you could say that because for them, there's a personal cost to banning alcohol, no personal cost to banning guns. And so removing biases, stepping from the outside, looking at it subjectively to say that if you're going to say that we should ban guns for X, Y, and Z, then my position is that my belief is that there's no reason you can give for banning guns that would not apply to alcohol, and actually vice versa. I can give more reasons to ban alcohol, more reasons that guns should not be banned than alcohol. So that's just to start off. That's what I mean. I don't know if we're on the same
Yeah,
page.
yeah.
So
Look, I imagine your argument is something along the lines of you do it for utilitarian reasons. You think that guns cause harm, therefore alcohol causes harm too, therefore we should ban harmful things. And if you were really wanting to push me, you'd say, therefore you should ban like driving and extreme sports and that's kind of how I imagine you playing out the debate. So just go and make the case, and then I'll respond.
all right. So to start off again, correct. If somebody is going to say that the reason for banning guns is due to the fact that lives are lost due to guns, which everybody agrees losing lives is horrible. Nobody wants lives lost. Um, Besides for the media, they love it. No, I'm just kidding. If you're going to say that the reason why you should ban guns is because of lives lost, then thing that lives are lost the same way guns are in the same number. Really, the number it could even be fewer if unless you come up with a formula for the amount of lives lost. But then anything that loses that is a cause of lives being lost would have to be banned as well, unless you could go ahead and make a case for why one should be and one shouldn't be. Why either there's a bigger net benefit to society, whatever the reason is, which we can agree or disagree with it, but an explanation or reason must be given. Besides that, I think, like I said, vice versa. On the contrary, that there's greater reasons to ban alcohol, not guns. I'll just list a few of them. First of all, when it comes to guns, we all agree that guns are the cause of many deaths. I mean, if you really, we should take out the suicide, and if you look at straight at the homicides, 11, 12, 13,000 homicides, which are horrible. But then on the flip side, if you look at the defensive gun uses and the amount of lives saved, there are vast studies that are done on them, and the numbers range anywhere. Low end, really 60,000. High end, I think it's like 3 million. The more reliable ones rest more at 500,000. I think 600,000 a year defensive gun uses. Now, not all. Some of them were just simply somebody showing a gun. Some of them were the gun was actually used. The perpetrator shot. So when you look at guns, despite the fact that there are horrible things that are the outcome of guns, there are also great things that are the outcomes, where potential killers that would have done so either via gun legally or illegally, or via any other method like a knife, or whether it was rape. Guns stopped a lot of evil, whereas alcohol alcohol took lives, but I don't think any case can be made, or any statistics can be shown where alcohols are actually saving more lives than they're killing. Um, Also, alcohol, only the person who's drinking the alcohol benefits. Society doesn't benefit. The person who's not drinking doesn't benefit. Guns, the person, not only does the person that's armed benefit, but people around them benefit. Whether it's the household and it's protecting the household, whether it's protecting a family, or the nation as a whole to protect against the tyrannical government, which we can debate whether the possibility of that exists or not. But if we agree that the possibility does exist, then the entire society benefits due to having an armed population. We'll start with that. I think those are the three key differences between. I forgot to mention the third. The third is banning guns. The case would have to be made that banning guns are going to lead to less homicides. Where obviously, if you ban guns, there are going to be less homicide by gun via gun. But you'd really have to show a drastic decline in homicides overall. And there are many studies that show that even when there's less guns, even when the stricter gun laws and more guns are taken away, not necessarily does that reflect the homicide rate overall. So if you look at alcohol, if you were to take away alcohol, then the deaths by alcohol, we would all agree, would go way down because there would be people wouldn't be able to just go to a bar and get alcohol. There still would be, but alcohol, but we don't see that without alcohol, that there'd be very few deaths. You wouldn't see still the same amount of deaths that there are now that alcohol is legal. And I'll leave it with that.
Probably. Oh no, that's upstairs. Okay. Sorry, somebody just came into this room. So this is the ground level. If you just go upstairs right there, 103, I believe it's on that side of the room. No worries. Okay, so just to clarify, your argument. Look, I'm not overly interested in like the gun debate right now because it's not really the topic. The topic is just, does a stance which says advocating guns logically lead you to ban alcohol? It seems that the only argument you've really made there is that if you say that you ban guns because of lives lost, alcohol also loses lives, therefore you should ban guns. I'm just interested, do you think that goes the other way as well, to say that if you support legalizing guns, you should be in support of all things which have the potential of losing life as long as there's a benefit? So, for example, like, let's say there's like a really hard drug, like crocodile, like a lot of the time it just kills, or bath salts, like that kills people. But, some people like it. So would you say that, because like lives lost is lives lost, anyone who stands for gun rights should also stand for bath salts rights?
So when it comes to drugs, first of all, I have a very, very libertarian stance on drugs. I know there are some countries, there are some places that have tried that are now have 100% legal drugs, and what they do is they just put people that they catch into rehabilitation. My stance on drugs is very libertarian, and if people who are taking drugs are hurting themselves, a person has a full right to go ahead and do that. Should it be legalized or decriminalized? That's a good question. I don't know exactly where I'd stand. I'd first start off with decriminalization instead of legalization. But if it's a drug that's just affecting the person that's taking it, then they have a full right to do that. The same way we agree that a person has the right to eat and become obese, which greatly increases their chance of dying. So when it comes to people doing things to themselves, I'm very libertarian. People should have the right to do whatever they want.
What about much bigger weapons? What about like tanks? Because like the argument tanks would be lives lost as well. Would you also say, well, look, like if you're for gun legalization, lives are lost there. Lives lost might be lost with tanks, so you might as well legalize tanks. Do you think that follows the same logic?
No. So when you get to tanks, where as opposed to, for instance, hard drugs, like then which I mentioned, drugs you're doing it to yourself. Tanks, you're going to be doing it to other people. Now, guns as well, you're going to be doing it to other people. But then you get back to the points that I mentioned, where guns, despite the fact that it's killing other people, there are a number of net benefits to society that I believe greatly outweigh that amount of people that die at the hand of guns. If you want to go, this is what I got into actually, Daniel, in our debate, I believe it was 2 weeks ago. Whereas if you believe that you have an inherent right to self-defense, then why does it stop at guns, and why does it not go to tanks? And the answer to that is that there are a number of answers to that, but one is there are two parts to
That's
the
not
right
what I'm
of
sorry.
guns. One is to protect
just
myself.
so we're not debating something we don't disagree on. I'm not talking about the self-defense thing. I'm just trying to interrogate the reason you believe why it is that all things which lose life wouldn't be similarly swallowed up by the logic you've just presented. And the answer you've given, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that when you actually do the net benefits balance, guns show up in the positive, but tanks would show up in the negative. So therefore, you're not obliged to support tanks just because you support guns. Have I got that right?
It could very well be that tanks will come back negative, but that's why I was getting into a little bit more than that. It's that I don't need tanks to be able to have my right of self-defense. It's not a necessity so much as guns are, because when I'm getting attacked by people who are disobeying the law, I'm getting attacked with guns. Me having guns now levels the playing field. I'm not getting attacked.
So you'd be okay with outlawing, for example, assault weapons as long as they could keep their handguns?
When you say assault weapons, I mean it's a loosely term that's
you'd be okay with beating
around.
AK-47s because you don't need them. You've got your handgun.
Well, if it's fully automatic, it's already been banned. I mean, should it be banned or should it not? Again, I'd have to look at the data, but if it's really necessary, if it's not necessary, then I'm fine with semi-automatic.
Let's not play a shell game here. I'm just using the exact logic you just used. You said, well, you don't need a tank because you've got a gun, right? So if you want to defend yourself, you don't need the most extreme thing if there's a smaller but practical option. So I'm just using that line of logic. You would also then say, well, you don't need a semi-automatic because you've got a handgun. So
a handgun is a semi-automatic. One pull on the trigger, one bullet goes out.
You don't need like
just about every single gun you're going to see. Just about every single gun you see in your life is a semi-automatic.
I know my terminology. There's like a mixed messaging here. But are you still there?
Right, unless you're talking about a revolver. A revolver, unless you're talking about a revolver, where you have to load or something, anything that you have to reload the chamber after every shot. And my answer to that is absolutely not, because that is far inferior to the guns that are on the streets being used by people that are just not obeying the law.
Sorry,
and
the word semi-automatic. Just excuse me for that slip. You would say that you don't need, for example, really high range, armor piercing, guns capable of firing those sorts of rounds, because when it comes to defend yourself, a handgun will do the trick. Is that, forget the word semi-automatic? Is that kind of where that logic leads, in your opinion?
If a semi-automatic is enough, which I believe was the reasoning for the abolishment of making it illegal to have automatic because it wasn't a necessity, then if semi-automatic is enough, then I'm perfectly fine with that. But then again, you mentioned at the end over there about the semi-automatic, the armor piercing or whatnot. If you'd have to show me that the people that are dying because it was armor piercing or whatever it is, and had it not been, then they wouldn't die, then we can have this discussion. If absolutely no extra lives are lost because the bullets were also armor piercing, then then this discussion really
it's just the problem is that the reason I feel this is a bit of a shell game is that I could turn that towards tanks, right? So I could say then, well, look, you'd have to show me that the tank was killing more people than the person with the bump stocks and the long range armor piercing bullets was. And you could make a case that actually you probably could kill people just as easily. So look, I guess what worries me moving forward is that it seems that you have a bit of an inconsistent logical framework, that for some things you're like, well, it's about necessity, but for other things it's about net utility. So it seems that whenever I push you into saying, would you allow like really things which think people feel are obviously dangerous, like tanks or like hard drugs, you're not using utility anymore. You're like necessity, right? Oh, we don't need the tanks, you don't need the drugs or whatever, like you can do other things. But when I push you towards the other direction, when I say, okay, well, why don't we start paring back on some of the guns we do have, then it's about, well, you have to show me it's a net positive or net negative, right? So what I'd say is that I'm just trying to figure out which one, because I've got an argument which is for alcohol legalization with either one, but I just don't want to give you like a utility argument and then you say, is it necessary? Likewise, I don't want to give you like a necessity argument for you to then just say, well, it's about utility. Does this kind of confusion of
let me explain my position. I'll try to make it as clear as I can. And this will be alcohol and guns. This is my stance. Anything that you're doing that's just going to harm you and nobody else, do it. Whatever makes you happy, go for it. If it's not harming other people, then great. If it's something that's harming other people, then the equation changes and we have to look at it. Now, what do we take into account? There are a number of things that we take into account. There's something that you could look at net benefit to society, which you can go ahead and make a case for anything. But as far as guns are concerned, the consistency with guns is, which is the reason why I am advocating guns, is because guns have a very big net benefit to society, a positive net, a net positive to society, and that is twofold.
I get
One,
that.
I'm able to protect myself from. Yeah, but let me finish so that everything will be consistent. One is that I can protect myself from anybody walking down the street that wants to inflict pain or do anything to me. And especially when you have females or whatnot, or people that are inferior in strength, it's a great equalizer. And then there's a second thing, one that we can protect against the possibility of a tyrannical government, which if you want to make a case that it's impossible, you can make that case. But those are the two reasons why I should have a gun.
Okay.
Now you can disagree, and we can have that
that's
argument.
Fine. That lays it out. So your criteria is the following: one, if you can prove that it only harms yourself, then it should be okay. But if there's some risk of it hurting other people, then you've got to do the net benefits for society, and that's the deciding criteria. Is that a fair summation, do you think?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Here's the first distinction between alcohol and guns. You can't kill people with alcohol, other people with alcohol. It only hurts yourself. So therefore, if you're not obliged to be anti-alcohol if you're anti-gun.
You can only kill yourself. What do you mean? About 30 people die a day by the hands of others drinking alcohol, just as much as people die a day by guns.
Yeah, but you said that you like, your claim is that if you're anti-gun, you must be anti-alcohol. And but you also said that a criteria you think is a good first step is to ask, does it just hurt you or does it hurt other people? So what I've said is that alcohol just hurts you.
Correct.
So therefore, you could be anti-gun because you don't believe in the net benefits thing, but pro-alcohol because you also believe the thing you believe, that is that if it just hurts you, it's fine.
But that's false. Alcohol hurts other people. When a person gets behind the wheel drunk, he crashes into other people and kills them. And about 30 people die a day at the hands of another person being under the influence.
Okay.
Not themselves.
Yep. Okay. Sure. So then you say, so then the next question would be the net benefits question. So I guess the question there is that, for me, it's, if you want doing net benefits, you've got to compare frequency and impact of positive versus negative use for the two things, right? So I guess the first thing is that with alcohol, how do I say this? One could say that drink driving is illegal, but alcohol isn't illegal. So the same way in which, you know, like murdering people with a gun is illegal, but owning a gun is legal. And you just have to compare how often people use alcohol safely and responsibly versus use it irresponsibly. So I would say that on any given night, there are way more people responsibly enjoying alcohol than there are people responsibly defending themselves from an attack. Just because there are more opportunities to have fun with alcohol than there are people getting attacked. Do you think that's a fair assumption?
First of all, even if it's true, why should that be the deciding factor of whether something should be legal or illegal? Unless that's what you're saying.
Because you said that. No, sorry.
Deciding factor.
Because you introduced the criteria of net benefits, right? Net benefits involve weighing the benefits against the harms. So why would you question why the benefits are relevant? You introduced that criteria.
Not why the benefits are irrelevant, but why that benefit. For instance, let me ask you a question hypothetically. Say guns save 2 million people per year, while alcohol saves none, but yet more people are enjoying alcohol more than those two people. Would you still make the case that alcohol should be legal and not guns?
So what you're saying is the only benefit which is relevant is if it saves lives.
Not only one that's relevant, but it's definitely a greater benefit than somebody having an enjoyment. Would you not agree?
Well, that's an interesting philosophical question. So what if I said to you, would you prefer a world where everyone was miserable all the time but everyone lived, versus a world where fewer people lived but not everyone was miserable? Which one would you choose?
And I get what you're saying. It's a philosophical question, and it's a question that I'd have to think about.
Well, actually,
I mean,
you shouldn't have to think about that.
But
Just a moment
it's
ago,
really a strong
wait, just a moment ago,
no,
you made the definitive statement that the lives was the most important benefit. So if that question is difficult for you,
correct.
then it's not clear that lives
No,
is the most important benefit.
The reason why that question is difficult and it's not contradictory is because it's really a loaded question. You're posing the question in a way that's you're putting only two possible scenarios where that's not the two scenarios that we're dealing with. Now, when you pose the question, you pose it as in more lives saved and not having lives lost, or everybody be miserable. That's really a loaded way of asking.
Yeah.
Is everybody going to be miserable? Was everybody is miserable before alcohol?
No, but this is,
people might be miserable during prohibition, but 100 years from now, when people forget, will people still be miserable?
Look, the thought experiment is not supposed to be a perfect analogy for the world. It's like the purpose of thought experiments is to be extreme. There to be limit cases to test claims, right? So the claim which I am testing, which you said earlier, is that human lives is the most important benefit. I get that it's a loaded question, right? But what it proves is that lives saved actually isn't the most important benefit. That's all. I'm not saying that therefore I win. I'm just saying that clearly it shows that there are exceptions to that prioritization. Does that make sense?
So yes, and here's why I was also hesitant to answer, because it really is a very hard philosophical question to answer, and most people that answer it will end up getting themselves into a problem. And here's what it is. Everybody wants no lives. Everybody wants people to live. Nobody wants anybody to die. But if I were to ask you like this, philosophically, would you advocate one person dying, but nobody having any pain forever?
Well, I'm gonna so with that question, I actually think pain is somewhat useful. But let's just assume we substitute pain for no one having any suffering or whatever forever.
Or suffering,
yeah.
Yes,
yeah, forever.
Would you advocate?
Yeah, look, I get, look, for the purposes of how you mean the question, yes, I would sacrifice a person in order to make everyone fine. Actually, look, let's just rephrase the question.
And as would I.
If I could eliminate poverty forever by sacrificing someone, then yes, I would eliminate poverty forever by sacrificing someone. Yeah, like.
Would you sacrifice 1,000 people for that?
Okay, right. So good question, right? Where's the limit test?
Right. That's
yeah.
Right. So that's why it was very difficult for me to answer when you said everybody living miserable. That's really a scale. Yeah. Is it miserable to the point where they can't live anymore? Is it just that, oh, I'm not enjoying myself that much?
Yeah, but now we agree.
I'm just explaining why.
No, because hang on. Now we agree, because that was what I was saying, that it's not just a matter of lives are the most important thing. It's actually a matter of balance, which is why the benefits have to be weighed. It just can't be a matter of you saying the enjoyment benefits don't matter because lives is the most important thing. So we now agree that the enjoyment benefits do matter if they are big enough in scale.
Okay, fine. I agree 100%. Okay. So, but first of all, the onus would be on you to show that the net benefit from alcohol is greater than that of guns. Well, in order to show that, you have to show that being miserable from not having alcohol is worse than all the lives saved. Hang on.
The onus is on both of us, mate. You have to prove that lives are actually saved from guns, and that those lives are more, couldn't have been saved elsewhere, and that the the onus is definitely on both of us here. Let's not pretend to move the goalposts. Let me just.
No.
Okay.
When I say
continue making my case on the benefits thing, because I wanted to make sure that we could just agree that the benefits thing was relevant. We've spent 5 minutes doing that, and we agree now that if I show the benefits a bit, then they are relevant. We can move to lives saved in a month.
I agree with that from the opening of the debate.
No. You said at the beginning. You said lives saved is the most important thing. Benefits don't matter, right? It took us a little bit for us to agree that benefits matter. So let me just continue down this road for a little bit, right? So I would say, generally speaking, that we would agree that on any given day, at any given point in time, there are vast amounts of people responsibly enjoying alcohol, right? They are having a good time. It is making their lives better. Do we agree? Okay, correct. We would agree that with far less frequency are people fending off attackers, simply because there are just more opportunities for you to have a good time with alcohol than there are attackers at your door. That doesn't mean, I'm not implying, by the way, automatically that means I win the debate or anything. I'm just saying that obviously the frequency of benefit for one is outweighing the frequency of benefit for the other.
That's if you take out the guns stopping us from a tyrannical government.
Yep. Okay,
then,
sure.
Then you'd be correct.
Okay, so you're now saying that sure, the frequency of saving people.
If you
hang on, let me finish.
It's constant.
So you're saying the frequency of saving people might not be higher, but the constant repelling of a tyrannical government is higher in frequency. Is that your kind of new?
That's one thing that I'm saying, but that's why I say even if you want to take that away, even if you want to take away even if we were to both agree that the possibility of a tyrannical government is impossible.
No, I won't take that away.
I would still.
No, I'll go for the higher burden.
No, I'm saying even if you want
with banned guns, there isn't a tyrannical government. So clearly, the tyrannical government isn't a constant threat. It's like a temporally spaced out one. So you can't claim, like, you would have to claim that with even less frequency, because that benefit only accrues like once in a tyrannical government, if you will, which it clearly isn't very often.
It's not every other. The deterrent is every second. Any second, the government can become tyrannical. The guns are every second a deterrent to that.
But you never
to the possibility of a tyrannical government.
You never actually get to claim, like, the deterrent effect only works if you assume that the threat is constant, right? So if the threat's constant, you would expect a test case scenario like Australia to automatically be overrun. But because the threat isn't actually constant, you don't need a constant deterrent, if that makes sense, right? Because, yeah, does that make sense?
No, because something isn't happening doesn't mean the threat isn't constant. If a ship's out at sea and the storm is there's 20-foot waves and the ship hasn't sunk yet, doesn't mean that there's no constant threat of the ship sinking.
No, hang on. No, your analogy is more that as long as the ship's on the water, it doesn't matter what the weather is. The threat of storm is constant. That's what you're saying. Yeah.
Yes.
But what I would say is that, for example, you know how ships adjust the way their sails are in storms so that they don't get all wet and stuff? Yeah, okay. What I would say is that the ship doesn't need to be in storm mode all of the time just because the threat of storm is constant. You react when the thing happens.
Therefore,
so therefore, the gun, having guns,
but the threat
society is not a benefit up until the storm comes. Right, so for all of the time where there's no storm or no tyrannical government, there isn't actually a benefit.
As that, correct me if I'm wrong. You're saying that although I'm deterring something right now, I'm doing something to deter an evil that will happen in the future. There is not a constant benefit now.
Yeah, pretty like will is different to might, but yes, right. Basically, you never actually realize the benefit until the threat comes. You don't get to claim, that every second guns were around, we would have been communist Russia. So you don't get to claim that as a temporally constant threat. You get to claim it as like a speculative benefit which might occur in the future.
Well, on that, two things. One, there's the constant peace of mind that you have knowing that it can't happen, whether it will happen or not. And two is, I think it's semantics, but even if you want to throw it out and say it's not constant, but still again, then we'll get, and that's why when I said before, we can even both agree that the possibility of a tyrannical government is impossible, and I could still make my case that despite the fact that it's less frequent than the alcohol, would you rather get paid a penny a minute and it's more frequent, or $1 million a week?
Wait, sorry, what's the purpose? Obviously, I just go for what gives me more money, but what's the point?
Right. So you have to show that the net benefit to society is actually a benefit.
Yeah, no.
Saying that happens frequently isn't a.
Yeah, no, I agree. As I said at the beginning, right? It's frequency times impact. So yeah. Look, I agree there. But so just to put the tyrannical government aside, even if we don't agree 100%, you agree that what I'm saying isn't like irrational, right? It's not like only a crazy person would not believe that this is a constant benefit.
What listen, I disagree with that, but and we can have that discussion. I just don't want that to take up the entire time, because the case that I'm making stands even if we agree on.
So all I'm trying to get at, point out, just to get back to the motion, that there is a sensible case that allows you to differentiate alcohol and guns. I think that your point about deterrence is interesting. I don't think only a crazy person would think that, but I also think that my point is interesting, and you don't have to be crazy to believe that the threat isn't constant. So putting that one aside, let's move to the impact. So what we've now kind of come at is we agree that the frequency of the benefit from alcohol is greater than the frequency of the benefit from guns, but your claim is that the gun impact of the benefit is higher, such that it outweighs the frequency, if you will. So correct. Yeah, what I would say here is that I think many of the benefits you've stated of owning firearms are drastically overstated. So I would say that most home invasions and times where you would say you would need a gun, you actually don't need a gun to protect yourself. For the following reasons, basically that. And this is reflected in many countries which don't have guns as prolific as in America. When most people who are criminals aren't murderers, and if they want to steal from your home, it's actually better for them if no one dies, because there's less risk of police going after them, there's less risk to their own personal safety. So really, when you're faced with a criminal, even if they have a gun, it is in the criminal's interest that no one dies. They just want cash. I admit that, yep, there's a small proportion of people who are just bloodthirsty murderers out there. But really, the vast majority of criminals, where the vast majority of cases where people say like, oh, I saved myself because of a gun, they didn't save shit, right? They saved money, which if they just had home insurance would have been covered anyway. So what do you make of that argument?
So first of all, I know you meant I don't know if you have the statistics to back that up. I know you're mentioning. I mean, it's more psychological, which I can definitely hear that most. I don't know if it's most, but when a normal person goes and he doesn't want there to be any casualties, because then obviously the investigation becomes more intense, and the sentencing will be more intense. And I can understand it, but the question is that statistically true that the vast majority of them, the vast majority of times would not have resulted in a death? Now,
hang on.
There are a number of
the statistics question. Obviously, as you well know, there are lobby groups for statistics which support both conclusions. But here is a statistic which we can definitely agree on, right? Like, there are more thieves than murderers. We can agree with that, right?
Sure.
Yeah, so therefore it follows then that the instances I'm talking about of, you know, where you need to defend yourself not requiring a gun outnumber the instances you're talking about.
Well, again, and then we got to get back. The gun that I'm using is not only for you're bringing up a case of like home people are breaking into homes. Yeah. Many of the times that they break into homes, these people are armed, guns drawn. A lot of them are under the influence of whether it's alcohol or drugs. And then there's another point. There's the people that are getting raped. The rape aspect. If they were to be armed, they'd be able to stop those rapes as well. Like I mentioned, it's the great equalizer between somebody who's superior physically beating down on the person who's inferior physically. Yep. And the gun is the great equalizer for that. And it could have been whether it's a girl jogging along the Hudson River that's getting abducted. There are so many. The defensive gun use numbers are so vast.
No. So,
and hang on. Some of them.
What I'm saying is, I'm not denying that you can construct a scenario where guns would be useful. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just trying to interrogate the frequency of those scenarios. And it seems to me that like kidnappings and murders are pretty low, right, compared to things where you didn't need a gun, just like home invasion and thievery. I think rape is an interesting test case, absolutely. But then I would ask you this: you know how like there's all those stats about how most rapes come from people who the person knows, right? Like, how willing are these people to use a gun? Which is why, for example, there are so many rapes in America, despite the fact that guns are legal, because many times, you know, people who have been raped don't want to kill their rapist. Or do you know what I mean? Like, I admit that there are some.
Well, I don't know if there are any statistics showing how many people of rape victims were armed and unwilling to shoot the perpetrator. So I'm not sure if that really holds anything.
We do know. What we do know is that many rapes, for example, occur by people who the victim knows. That we know that 100%. Likewise,
Yes,
we know
correct.
many assaults are domestic violence, right? Like they come from people who the person knows. So that means I would just ask you, how useful is a gun in that scenario where the victim is unwilling to shoot the perp?
Well, it's definitely useful because we know there are many cases where somebody who's armed, people that try to rape armed people, whether it was women, children, and a gun came into use, whether it was the person that was armed or somebody else. That's what I mentioned before. When you go look at the defensive gun use statistics, it's not always people saving themselves from an attacker. A lot of times it's people saving others from an attacker, where there are armed citizens that were in the vicinity that were able to save lives. And when it comes to defensive gun use, really, most of these statistics, they mention how it's really unquantifiable, because a lot of times where somebody is about to commit commit a crime, whether it's rape, and the person just showed a gun, and the presence of a gun deterred the either attacker, saying whatever it was.
So, you know, the other reason it's unquantifiable is that you don't really know how often that happens. It's actually impossible to measure. But we could use our intuitions, right? We could say, look, how often is it that someone gets raped in the view of another citizen, and that citizen, it wasn't enough for them to call the police, or, you know, physically they needed the gun. So we're talking really only about how often is it that rapes are witnessed by grandmothers who can wield guns but are unable to wield phones. You know what I mean? Like, it's.
Well, first of all, wielding a phone might not be as effective as wielding a gun. I think we could agree on. But when you look at the defensive gun use, the DGU statistics, they didn't just say, hey, there's this many rapes, I think there's this amount of people that could be in the vicinity of a rape, and I think that they put a lot of time and effort, and whether it was asking people, whether it's collecting data, a lot of data. And they got there through some of it is actually some data, and some of it is really speculation. The higher end ones, the 3 million, well, I think the 1.5 to 3 million ones is really ridiculous. But and that's why I said, if you look at them, I think the ones that peg it at about 500,000-600,000, I think are pretty legitimate numbers. And when you look at 500,000-600,000, going back to your question, are there many of them, a ton of them, the vast majority of them, that the perpetrator would not have ended up killing the person? 100%. But again, look at what is it? 10,000 of the 500,000, so that's 10,000 lives saved.
Yeah, so
is 10,000 lives saved not worth the alcohol?
Here. You know, we agree that there are obviously some cases where guns are useful. But all I'm doing is I'm just saying, I'm ruling out large swaths of where they would be useful, to the point where you can now envisage a world, to bring it back to the motion, where it is actually rational for someone to believe that actually guns aren't that useful. That yes, of course, where they are useful, it's very important and the impacts are big, but actually those numbers aren't that many. And that's just weighing benefits. We haven't even gotten to weighing harms then, right? Where you could talk about how often it is that guns are actually used to kill other people, right? And so, do you know what I mean, right? Like that like it seems to me that what we're arguing now is just about how big the scale of benefit is, and obviously we both agree that there's room for some of us to be probably right or probably wrong. But doesn't it seem to follow from that grey area, it certainly does from my perspective, that someone could rationally believe that the net benefit of alcohol is greater than the net benefit of guns, because the frequency of the benefit is so large, whereas the frequency of the benefit of guns upon interrogation seems to be quite small. And then when you take into the harms of guns, of course, you know, which are obvious, we've all seen the school shootings, seem to kind of bear out a rational decision to be in favor of a gun ban or an alcohol ban.
No, absolutely not. And I'll explain why. Let's go back to the philosophical question. How many lives are you willing to sacrifice for alcohol?
Wait, what do you mean?
How many lives are you willing to sacrifice for alcohol?
Oh, to allow everyone to enjoy alcohol.
Right? Yes.
Yeah, look, good question. I guess the first thing was to say any lives where the person took their own life, like it was just a personal risk. We can agree, we can rule all them out. The question is how much innocent collateral life would I allow? To be honest, I'm not going to quote a number, but I'm going to say that my tolerance is up there. It's the same as, for example, how many lives would I be willing to sacrifice for cars? You know, like, yeah, cars allow people a lot of freedoms. Alcohol allows people a lot of freedom. So yeah, I would sacrifice a fair few lives.
First of all, let's go back to something you mentioned over there. I'm not talking about the amount of lives lost by due to alcohol versus the benefit of alcohol. I'm talking about the amount of lives saved by guns versus the enjoyment of alcohol.
Yeah, that's just
right. We're weighing.
I'm not seeing the distinction between harms and benefits. The question you asked me was how many lives. What is the price you're willing to pay for the benefits of alcohol? And I'm just saying I don't know a number, but I am willing to pay a price. The same way I'm willing to pay a price for cars, or you know what I mean. I'm willing to pay a life price for that. What I'm saying is that I think that I'm not getting as good of a bargain for guns. Right, like I'm paying a higher life price and I'm not getting as much of a benefit as I am for alcohol.
So again, if I were to tell you that, let's say we can agree on a number that guns save 50,000 because of defensive gun uses. Guns save 50,000 people a year. Say of the 500,000, most of them went out and deadly. They save 50,000 people a year. Mm-hmm. Would you say, hey, I'm willing to ban guns despite the fact that they save 50,000 people a year, but I'm not willing to ban alcohol because alcohol has society benefits. Because people enjoy it. So what you're going to be taking away that enjoyment.
Yeah. So yeah, if the benefits are frequent and impactful enough, then yes. But the other thing as well is that you've got to remember you're kind of giving me only half the bargain here. Because if it was just a question about lives saved by guns versus benefits of alcohol, that doesn't really paint the full picture when I'm making my decision, right? I've got to subtract the amount of lives lost because of guns, right? So that 50,000 becomes lower. And I've also got to take into account the lives lost when alcohol is illegal, right? Because then you energize things like a black market, you fund more crime. Those criminals in turn can make things like less safety and loss of life. So if it was just a matter of just the lives saved by guns versus just the enjoyment of alcohol, maybe I wouldn't take that bargain. But if I took into account the lives lost by guns and the lives lost by banning alcohol, then yes, I would take the bargain.
So, but again on that point, and we're almost out of time, and it sucks because we go on this for a while. Unless you meant let's go back to guns, right? In guns, say you ban guns. Those lives lost, would all of them now not be lost?
Oh, yeah. So, for example, you can't do a school shooting without a gun. So, which is why in like Australia, there aren't school shootings, and in America, there are. So, yes, all the school children would be alive.
Correct. But the vast majority of people that are killed by guns are not done in mass shootings. The vast majority are done with gang-related violence, or done by use of a handgun, not these AR-15s that are being.
So, actually, the vast majority of gun death is suicide, and Australia similarly involves a much lower rate of gun-related suicide. So yeah, I'm saving a lot of lives if the guns are gone. That's in the back.
In Australia, actually, the number of people committing suicide not by gun actually dropped far more drastically than those that are committing suicide by gun. If you look at the statistics,
that doesn't matter. That's just
also Australia.
That's irrelevant. We saved some lives, and also some other lives were saved for some other reason. It's like, okay, excellent.
Correct. No, why are you saying it's for another reason?
Well, because you're just saying.
I'm saying that shows it's an externality.
No, you're just saying that there was people who were committing suicide via gun stopped committing suicide, and other people started committing suicide. I'm like, okay, sure, but these people stopped committing suicide still, so that's still a benefit.
No, what I'm saying is people who are committing suicide by gun, right? And before the ban and after the ban dropped. But those who the numbers of people committing suicide by other means from those same periods dropped more drastically. So you're trying to say that there are less people committing suicide by gun because of the gun ban. What I'm saying is it's not because of the gun ban, because it must be from an externality. Because if it's just because of the gun ban, then what's the reason that the people who are committing suicide not by guns drop far drastically?
Right. Oh, obviously, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. But obviously, it's just univariate, right? Like there are just multiple reasons for people doing less suicide, and guns is a part of it, and yours is a part of it. So, like, what I'm saying is that
but I don't see why.
Well, why guns are a part of it at all.
Yeah, sorry, continue.
Yeah, okay, you're failing to see why guns would be a part of it at all. Well, I mean, there's not really enough time to summate this reason, but it's about it's about suicide.
I know that's it.
Look,
I know. I think we should have a second one on that. Obviously, we can't tonight, but I'd love to have a second one because I don't think we even covered.
No, look, let's put a pin in it here. I think we've back and forth on some useful stuff. Maybe we'll see if anyone comments, and we'll go again next week if we've both got the time.
Sounds like a plan. I really enjoyed. Thank you so much.
Cheers, dude.
Yeah.